Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, to our brethren in Georgia, in Fiji Island, Mexico, Spain, and also in Africa, to the United Kingdom, and to our brethren in Australia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 3 on the subject, the half-hour silence. Now, I would like to begin our study on 1SR 226. 1SR 226. It is evident that salvation is preached in types as well as by the word. There is a type for every church event and transaction in connection with the gospel of Christ. The termination of these types closed the typical and ushered in the antitypical period, under which time every type must meet its antitype. So the shepherd's rod is very plain, saying that every church event and transaction in connection with the gospel of Christ, there must be a type. 1SR page 226. In 1TG, number 47, on page 15, it says, "Now, if never before, we should see that where there is a type, there is also an antitype, and that where there is no type, there is no truth." So as never before, we are admonished, more particularly in the days in which we are living in, we need to focus our attention through the typological prophecy. And this is one of the chosen medium employed by God to defeat the enemy of souls. I would like to read 1SR Packet Edition, page 73. "So, completely disarming the enemy of souls, the great designer of these typological truths leaves the reader free to make his own choice as to whether he will continue in the darkness or come out into the light of the Lord, no longer to wonder what church to join or what is truth and what is error." 1SR Packet Edition, page 73. And the shepherd's rod called it as the only positive truths. Let's read 2SR 255, saying, "This light, being transmitted by marvels of typical events, is a clear manifestation that there is a type for every incident of vital interest to the Church of God." In 1SR 226, the statement says that there must be a type for every church event and transaction in connection with the gospel. But here it says that there is a type for every incident of vital interest to the Church of God. So the same, synonymous, in connection with the gospel. Then it says, which are the only positive proofs and clear explanations of divine providences, as there is no type for that which is false. Teachers of juries, without a typical representation for their claims of so-called Bible truths, and those who believe in them are as the blind, leading the blind. The types are worked out to expose the error and reveal the truth. The honest ones will shun the devil by embracing the facts and by walking in the light. That statement in 1SR Packet Edition, page 73, saying that God's people in reality, they will no longer be groping in the darkness and be in confusion what is truth and what is error, if they will only dwell on the typological truths, because that is the only positive proofs and clear explanation of divine providences. that if you are honest, according to this reading in 2SR 255, you will shun the devil by embracing the facts. What facts? That there is no type for that which is false. False movement, there is no type. In 2SR page 10, saying, 2SR page 10, it says, the same with the statement in 2SR 255, that teachers of juries without a typical representation for their claims of so-called Bible truths, and those who believe in them are as the blind leading the blind. So whatever fundamental doctrines that is being held by any such movements, we need to ask typological claims. That if there is no type and still we continually believe, then we are among the blind, lead by the blind leaders. Here in 2SR page 10, it says, and as the Bible is correct in the words, 2SR page 10, and as the Bible is correct in the words, if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch, then it would be useless to dispute the truth. The world is headed for the ditch. Would not this indisputable statement arouse the professed people of God from their slumber and sleep? Past experiences prove that many will say, it is not I. Knowing that this deception would arise in the last days, God has devised this pictorial representation of the truth by which He is able to enlighten His church and call out His people. While the enemy has succeeded in confusing the written word, God lightens the earth with His glory by these symbolic revelations, and by which He discloses the entire truth and uncovers the traps of the devil. Then it says, thus through types and symbols, He makes wise the simple and confounds the prudent, by showing that where there is no type, there is no truth. So this reading, brethren, implicitly declared that Satan, the enemy of inspiration, has no difficulty in confusing the written word of God. He had been able to successfully twist the meaning of the written word of God. But through the three chosen medium of God, represented by the Trinity, which is through types, symbols, and parables, the devil will have a hard time to twist the true meaning of the symbols, parables, and types. The shepherd's rod called the types as great searchlight. Let me read to you. In 2SR 267, it says, a great searchlight by the power of the Spirit shining through the types is the only medium that can remove the obstruction and clear the way to an understanding of this and many other mysteries that are considered incomprehensible and that baffle the human mind. How about symbols? In 2SR 288, it says, 2SR 288, written words can be misconstrued, but symbols cannot, thus making it possible for both learned and unlearned to immediately distinguish the difference between truth and error. So it was guaranteed by God that written words can be easily misconstrued by the devil, but symbols cannot, and also types, according to the voice of inspiration. It is very plain on 1SR Pocket Edition, page 73, that the enemy of souls were completely disarmed through the typological truths. How about the parables? 2SR page 10, 2SR page 10. The chief purpose of teaching by parables is that the truth may be revealed to God's children and at the same time counseled from His enemies. So here in 1SR page 124, it says, the picture tells the story. Symbols do not lie. What is the picture? The type, the photograph. The picture tells the story. And symbols do not lie. Do not forget that, brothers and sisters. It says, the picture tells the story. And symbols do not lie. Picture represent the type or the photograph. Because according to 1SR 107, it says, the word type means the same as the word photograph. So picture, which is the photograph, that is the type. Now I would like to read 1SR on page 49. 1SR page 49. Thus we have a prophecy and a type for every event. Do not forget that. The word every meaning all. In 1SR 226, it says every incident. It says has a vital interest to the Church of God. And the other statement says every event in connection with the gospel. So the statement here in 1SR page 49, thus we have a prophecy and a type for every event that has or will take place in this wicked world of ours. So there must be a type for every event that has or will take place in this wicked world of ours. Now let's read 2SR. In page 240, it says, said Enoch, 2SR 240, said Enoch, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints. Jude 14. Then it says, the prophecy by Enoch is not the second coming of Christ in the clouds. For when he shall appear in glory, he comes not with his saints, but rather for his saints. Neither could it be of his coming with his saints on the other side of the millennium. For in such a case, it could not have been a message to the antediluvian world. It would have been improper and without object or lesson to that people. If Enoch should have preached the world Christ's third coming before preaching his second coming for his saints, what then? So there are three visible coming of Jesus Christ. I would like to, because you cannot say second coming if there is no first visible coming, second visible coming, and the third visible coming. But Jude verse 14 is not pointing to Christ's visible coming, but pointing to Christ's second invisible coming. And only if we could be able to understand, brothers and sisters, the three invisible coming of Jesus Christ, then only at that time that we could understand the subject, the half-hour silence. Now, I would like to read 2SR 200, let's read the statement. 215, 2SR page 215. It says, had the silence of half an hour pointed to the coming of Christ, the shepherd is pointing to the second visible coming of Jesus Christ. Had the silence of half an hour pointed to the coming of Christ, at which time he takes his saints with him, there would be no necessity for the angel to offer their prayers. Furthermore, it would be unnecessary to cast fire, which is the Spirit of God, from the golden altar to the earth. Again, if the opening of the seventh seal means the coming of Christ, then only those under the six seals would have been considered in the judgment, and there could be no seventh seal, which would show lack of perfection and completeness of the judgment and of the gospel. It would also be contrary to the number of seals on the book, as the six seals have reference to 6 periods in which the saints were sealed. The seventh must also apply to a sealing period. Otherwise, it cannot be called seventh seal. First of all, the reason why B.T. Hotep explained here in 2SR 215, completely denying that such event is pointing to the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, because that is the teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as taught by Uriah Smith, that the half-hour silence represent the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, by which even in that event, it cannot be applied 7 days, because there are 14 days all in all. 7 days from the third heaven when Jesus Christ descended to the earth, and then 7 days together with all the saints, resurrected and living saints, to return to the third heaven. 14 days all in all. So, it cannot be and can never be applied in that period of time. Now, let us carefully study this very important subject, the half-hour silence. Now, we already proven with absolute facts that all the event, there must be type and antitype. And the statement in connection with the gospel, of all the events, the coming of Christ is the most important. According to 2SR 242, it says, it would have been unreasonable and an injustice to the chosen people of God if he should have left them in darkness concerning the time of the most important event of all church history, the coming of Christ. So of all the events in connection with the gospel, the most important is the coming of Jesus Christ. So if there are three visible coming of Jesus Christ, there must also be three invisible coming of Jesus Christ, by which our subject, the half-hour silence, must be applied only to Christ's invisible coming. Now, I would like to read 2SR 162. 2SR page 162. It says, the fire coming down out of heaven upon the beast denotes the second death of the wicked. 100 years after the second resurrection, behold, the Lord cometh to execute judgment upon all and to convince all that are ungodly of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Jude, verse 14 and verse 15. While the 14th verse of Jude applies to Christ's coming to the most holy apartment in the heavenly sanctuary. So what is Jude verse 14? Christ's coming to the most holy apartment in the heavenly sanctuary. And the 15th verse to his second advent, the completeness of the words find their fulfillment after the millennium, for at that time only can he execute the final judgment upon all the ungodly from Cain to the end of this present world. So, the shepherd's rod is very plain, right? Let us focus first to Jude 14 and 15. Let us read the great controversy. The great controversy, 425. So, let us read the statement here. The great controversy, 425. Besides the coming of the Lord to his temple, that is Malachi, right? Malachi also foretells his second advent. His coming for the execution of the judgment in these words. And I will come near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against false swearers, and against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, and that turn aside the stranger from his right, and fear not me, saith the Lord of hosts. Malachi 3, verse 5. So Malachi 3, verses 1 to 4 precedes Malachi 3, verse 5. Then it says, Jude refers to the same scene when he says, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds. Jude 14 and 15. This coming and the coming of the Lord to his temple are distinct and separate events. So, very plain. Distinct and separate events. So let us focus first. Jude 14 and Malachi 3, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4 is pointing to the same event. And also Malachi 3, verse 5 and 6, or verse 5, and Jude 15 is pointing to the same event. Or in other words, let us distinctly separate the event in Malachi 3, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the event of Malachi 3, verse 5, according to the great controversy, because that is distinct and separate events. The same with Jude, verse 14. and Jude, verse 15. Distinct and separate event. Now let us focus first, Malachi 3, verses 1 to 3, or including verse 4. Now let us read the old symbolic code. One symbolic code, number 16, page 2 and page 3. One symbolic code, number 16, pages 2 and page 3. Question. Shepherd's Rod, volume 2, page 240, explains that Jude 14 and 15 refer to the coming of the Lord to His temple. But Testimonies for the Church, volume 6, page 392, applies it to the second coming of Christ. How do you harmonize this and Malachi 3, verses 1, 2, 3? So this is the answer. One symbolic code, number 16, page 2 and 3. It says, answer, Jude 14 and 15 are explained in the Shepherd's Rod, volume 2, page 162 and 241. However, we may add, the perfect fulfillment of this scripture embraces a period of time in which 3 judicial events are to expire. So do not forget that statement. Jude 14 and 15 is pointing to the fulfillment of the 3 judicial events that are to expire. And we know the word expire meaning ended or closed. Namely, first, the investigative judgment for the dead as He came to His heavenly temple in 1844. So that is very plain. October 22, 1844, the judgment for the dead expired. This statement concretely builds the absolute fact that the preposition for judgment for the dead, pointing to Christ's mediatorial work in the holy place. But the preposition of judgment of the dead, pointing to Christ's mediatorial work in the most holy place. Now, I would like to read again. Track number 3, page 18. It says, hence, His mediatorial work began first in the holy place, then in the most holy. Track number 3, page 18. So, Jude 14, brothers and sisters, the first application is applied in October 22, 1844. Now, I would like to illustrate to you because we already studied many subjects. And if you still remember, the subject, the 42 months prophecy, is also closely connected. From 1833, then October 22, 1844, 10 years. So this is called judgment for the dead. And the proceedings here is pointing to the temple, which is the first 5 seals. First seal, then second, third, then fourth, and fifth. First 5 seals. And it was finished in October 22, 1844, according to this reading. And we know that 1833, that was stated on White House Recruiter on page 19. So let us read again. It says, I would like to read the last part to minimize time. And as is well known, they started proclaiming it in the year 1833, announcing that the cleansing of the sanctuary was to commence in the year 1844. Thus, in 1833, the clock of parabolic time struck the hour of 6. Now, let us go back again to our reading. Remember, Jude 14, brothers and sisters, and Jude 15, there must be type and antitype. The type is pointing to Christ's invisible coming, and the antitype is pointing to Christ's visible coming. But even in Christ's invisible coming, there must also be distinct and separate events. Christ's invisible coming in the heavenly sanctuary and Christ's invisible coming on the earthly sanctuary. So we will be focusing to both Christ's invisible coming to the heavenly sanctuary and Christ's invisible coming to the earthly sanctuary. Now let us continue reading. One symbolic code, number 16, page 3. It says, second, the investigative judgment for the living that is soon to take place. If you still remember our subject on the 42 months prophecy, Can we project the diagram? I could no longer remember the title. 10 years sounding of the trumpet, 1833 to 1843, and we have 2011. Sounding of the trumpet. Now let us connect a little while on the subject. The time of the end and the sixth trumpet, 195. So if you still remember this diagram, it is the time of the end and the sixth trumpet. We read several times in the old symbolic code, 3 symbolic code 8 to 10, page 8, saying the time of the end is a period of time just before the end of the world. Just to review, in 2TG number 15, page 3 and 4, it says that the angel start proclaiming in the period, the time of the end. Revelation chapter 10. And the primary application is pointing to William Miller, which is also called the Midnight Cry from 1833 to October 22, 1844. In 2SR 181, it says the Midnight Cry was first proclaimed prior to 1844. And the coming of the bridegroom was Christ coming to the most holy place. So the coming of the bridegroom and Jude 14 and 15 and Malachi 3 are closely connected. Now, the voice of inspiration says that Jude 14 and 15 is pointing to two prominent events: judgment for the dead and judgment for the living. We already read in 2SR 241, at 240, it says, it would have been improper and without object or lesson to that people if Enoch should have preached to the world Christ's third coming before preaching his second coming for his saints. What then? Enoch prophesied of the coming of the Lord to his temple in the most holy place, in the heavenly sanctuary, with his saints in figure, not bodily, for the investigative judgment, to blot out their sins. 2SR 240. But the statement definitely declared, it is pointing directly to Christ's second coming to the most holy place to blot out their sins. Who are they? By which their sins will be blotted out at the second coming of Christ in the most holy place. Now let us read 2SR 241. Therefore, the prophecy by Enoch commenced its fulfillment in 1844, at which time the Lord came with the names and records of those who are sleeping in the grave. And when the investigation of the dead is finished, then he comes with the names of the living saints, first with the 144,000, and afterward with the great multitude of all nations and kindred and people and tongues. Revelation 7 verse 9. So, that is plain enough, brethren, that in October 22, 1844, that is the first coming of Jesus Christ, bringing the names of the righteous dead to blot out their sins. But the second coming, invisible coming of Jesus Christ to the most holy place is bringing the names of the 144,000 living saints to blot out their sins. So, in this subject, then we can easily discern that there are three comings of Jesus Christ in the most holy place. The first coming is to blot out the sins of the righteous dead. The second coming is to blot out the sins of the first fruits, 144,000 living saints. And the third invisible coming is to blot out the sins of the great multitude, the second fruits, Revelation 7 verse 9. Therefore, we need also to study Christ's invisible coming to the earthly sanctuary. We already enumerated one by one Christ's invisible coming to the heavenly sanctuary, the most holy place, by which the particular object in view is the second coming. The second invisible coming of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters. Now, let us now concentrate on the subject. And it is pointing to the half-hour silence. The half-hour silence, according to 2SR 220, is applied to Christ's invisible coming to the earth. Although Jude 14 and 15 is applied by Sister White to the second visible coming of Jesus Christ as stated in volume 6, 392. But the Shepherd's Rod plainly declared that it is even more definitely applied to Christ's invisible coming. Now let us read again. It says, second, the investigative judgment for the living that is soon to take place. Third, Christ's second coming and the judgment during the millennium. In the third application, on the first application of Jude 14 and 15, we are talking about Jude 14 and 15. I would like to illustrate. Jude 14, 15, up to 2011. In October 22, 1844, there is a judicial events that expired according to the reading in 1 Symbolic Code 16, pages 2 and 3. That is the proceedings in the holy place. But that is pertaining to the dead. Judgment for the dead. But in October 22, 1844 to 2011, I would like to, this is most holy place. This is holy place. Most holy place, that is verse 14. Holy place, that is verse 15. What is verse 15? Executive judgment against the wicked. What is verse 14? For the saints. What is Jude 15? It is for the wicked. What is for the saints? Blotting out of sins. What is for the wicked? Blotting out of names. So, that is the first application according to the Shepherd's Rod. But the second application is investigative judgment for the living. Now, so that investigative judgment for the living, exactly typifying the proclamation of the message on the midnight cry in its primary application, consists of 10 years. So let us look at again the diagram. So this is 1833 to 1844, that is 10 years. Then we have 2011 to 2021, 10 years. This is the period that pertains to the living. And it will expire on March 27, 2021 or October 10, 2022. But the third one, it says, Christ's second coming and the judgment during the millennium. So, it must be the same with the type. The third one must be pointing to Christ's second coming to the most holy place and Christ's third coming to the most holy place. Now, let us continue reading. It says, Malachi 3, 1 Symbolic Code 16, page 3. Malachi 3 first applies as a type to the purification of the earthly temple in the days of Christ, John 2, verse 14 and 15. But the direct application finds its fulfillment in the antitype, that is, in the purification of the church when He comes to His earthly temple, church, to purify the sons of Levi, the ministry, the 144,000. After this, so after Jesus Christ comes to the earth, Malachi 3, 1 to 3, to purify the sons of Levi. After this, He comes for the investigative judgment of the living to His heavenly temple to blot out their sins. Very plain. 1 Symbolic Code, number 16, page 3. So, that predicted event, when Jesus Christ came to this earth, the second invisible coming of Jesus Christ. What is the purpose? To purify the sons of Levi, the ministry. And to repeat again, if you will count the enumeration in Revelation 7, from verse 5 to verse 8, the tribe of Levi is on number 8. Why? To let us know that it points out to the 8th church in the New Testament succession, the house of David. Now, let us read 2SR 184. 2SR page 184. So, let us read. The coming of Christ as our high priest to the most holy place for the cleansing of the sanctuary brought to view in Daniel 8:14. What is the coming of Christ brought to view in Daniel 8:14? Christ coming to the most holy place. Then it says, the coming of the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days, as presented in Daniel 7, verse 13, and the coming of the Lord to His temple, foretold by Malachi, are descriptions of the same event. And this is also represented by the coming of the bridegroom to the marriage described by Christ in the parable of the 10 virgins of Matthew 25, the great controversy, page 426. The description by Daniel applies to the commencement of the judgment for the dead, but the one by Malachi 3, verse 1 to 3, is applicable to the judgment for the living. All of the same event, Day of Atonement, cleansing of the sanctuary. Now, the statement is very plain, Malachi 3, verse 1 to 3. That coming of Christ is on the Day of Atonement. Both heavenly sanctuary and earthly sanctuary. Malachi 3, verse 1 to 3. I would like to repeat again. What celebration or feast the coming of Christ in Malachi 3, 1 to 3? The absolute answer is Day of Atonement. To repeat again, that is Day of Atonement. Remember, in the Great Controversy, page 425 and 426, the Sure Prophecy declared clearly that Malachi 3, 1 to 3 and Malachi 3, verse 5, distinct and separate work. The same with Jude 14 and 15, distinct and separate work. When it comes to the heavenly sanctuary, the primary application of verse 15 that was in October 22, 1844 to 2011, the proceedings in the holy place. Distinct and separate work. Very plain. Not only separate work, but distinct. Not only distinct, but separate work. Jude 14, that is Christ's work in the most holy place. Blotting out of sins. That is why Jude 14 is intended for the saints. But verse 15, to the ungodly, to the wicked. And that work is in the holy place. Blotting out of names. But we focus our attention to the coming of Christ. According to the shepherd's rod, Malachi 3, verses 1 to 3, that coming of Christ is on the Day of Atonement, both heavenly and earthly sanctuary. Now, I would like to read track number 3, page 47 and 48 and then 46. So let us read page 47. Inescapably, therefore, the Lord's coming to His temple, Malachi 3, 1 to 3. I would like to remind first that according to one symbolic code, number 16, page 3, Malachi 3, 1 to 3, the first application is Christ coming to the earthly sanctuary to purify the sons of Levi. Then it says, after this, what does it mean? After Jesus Christ purified the sons of Levi, then He will return to the most holy place to blot out their sins. One symbolic code, number 16, page 3. So let us read again, track number 3, pages 47 and page 48. Inescapably, therefore, the Lord's coming to His temple, Malachi 3, verse 1 to 3. He's coming with all His angels, Matthew 25. And He's coming enthroned above the living creatures, Ezekiel 1. All three representing the same event as has been shown take place at the beginning of the judgment of the living, the time in which the judicial activities of the heavenly sanctuary extend to the earthly sanctuary, the church. Now let us decipher this statement. Track number 3, page 47 and page 48. There are three chapters in the Bible quoted here, Malachi 3, 1 to 3, and Matthew 25, and Ezekiel chapter 1. And the shepherd's rod plainly told us that these three, representing the same event, and what event? Take place at the beginning of the judgment of the living. Now let us read 2SR 171. It says, the sealing of the 144,000 is at the closing of the judgment of the dead and at the beginning of the judgment of the living. When does the sealing of the 144,000 takes place? It is in the period of time by which the proceedings in the most holy place is the closing work of the judgment of the dead. What is that closing work? The judgment of the dead is divided into two sections. The first section is blotting out of sins. The second section is granting of rewards. What does it mean by granting of rewards in the heavenly sanctuary? It means to inscribe their names in the book of resurrection. So, the shepherd's rod is very plain. that the sealing of the 144,000 living saints takes place in the period of time by which in the heavenly sanctuary, in the most holy place, it is the closing work of the judgment of the dead. But on the earth, it is the beginning of the judgment of the living. And here in tract number 3, page 47 and page 48, the beginning of the judgment of the living is the fulfillment of Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3. What is Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3? Investigative judgment of the living. Investigative judgment of the living. Now let me read to you tract number 3, page 43. It says, pointing directly to the time that the investigative judgment shall take place among the living, Malachi parallels both parables in his prophecy. Then the quotation is Malachi 3, verse 1, verse 2, and verse 3. Then it says, as the cleansings called for in the parables and in Malachi prophecy have never taken place, the investigative judgment of the living is obviously then yet future. What is Malachi 3, 1 to 3? Investigative judgment of the living, which is still future in the days of B.T. Hobbit. What is Malachi 3, 1 to 3? In one symbolic code, number 16, page 3. That is the time that Jesus Christ visits the earth to purify the sons of Levi. The same with Ezekiel chapter 1. That is pointing to the time when Christ will visit the earth. According to tract number 1, page 5. It says, the call of Ezekiel to the prophetic office is one of the most interesting experiences of the ancient seers, and the revelation of what he saw by the river Chebar is perhaps of greater importance to heaven and earth at this time than is any other vision on sacred record, because in a remarkable way it reveals that which unites heaven with earth, even as the Dardanelles links to important seas. Thus, this study of Ezekiel's vision, which brings to light earth being visited by the majesty of the universe, may be aptly termed the Dardanelles of the Bible. And that is the reason why tract number 3, page 47 and 48, it says, pointing to the same event, Christ's visitation to the earth to purify the sons of Levi. But that event must be fulfilled after the judicial events expire. According to a reading in one symbolic code, number 16, page 2 and 3, the first one is applied to Christ coming to the most holy place in October 22, 1844, when the judicial event expired. What judicial event? Judgment for the dead. But it says the second event is when the judgment for the living expire. What is the judgment for the living? Blotting out of names among the congregation of the living. And that is the cleansing of the sanctuary. Now let us read again tract number 3, page 53. It says, tract number 3, page 53. This startling revelation shows conclusively that the cleansing according to Daniel 8 verse 14 is first of the sanctuary in heaven and second of the sanctuary on earth. So that statement can be easily understood, my dear brothers and sisters. Thus, when Jesus Christ will visit the earth to purify the sons of Levi, indicates that the sanctuary in heaven is already cleansed. Because that is the statement. Christ will cleanse first the sanctuary in heaven before He will cleanse the sanctuary on earth. And that is pointing to the 8th church in the New Testament succession, the house of David. Now, brethren, I would like to read to you this reading in 2SR. 2SR page 218. 216 rather, I'm sorry. 2SR 216. What made the interruption and brought about the change? Let us first determine the length of the prophetic half-hour time. A day in prophetic time stands for a year. Ezekiel 4 verse 6. 1 hour is a 24th part
of prophetic year, and figuring 30 days to a month, it would be about 2 weeks. Half an hour would be half of 2 weeks. Therefore, 7 literal days. 7 days were used for purification. Exodus 29 verse 35 and 37, Leviticus 12 verse 2, Leviticus 13 verse 4, Leviticus chapter 5 verse 1, 9, 11, 12, 14, 15, 21, etc. From these references, we conclude that the half an hour or 7 days stand for the purification of the church, pointing forward to the fulfillment of Malachi 3 verse 1 to 6. But we have a more definite proof which will clear all doubts. In observance of the Passover, the Lord commanded Israel to celebrate that occasion 7 days. Leviticus 23 verse 5 to 8. Surely no one would say that God commanded His people to commemorate that event 7 days with no object in view. Israel after the flesh going into Egypt, then out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, the Passover in Egypt on the night when the death angel smote the firstborn of men and beasts. At the departure of Israel are types of the church at the present time, the church going out of Egypt. Worldliness, the purification of the church, the separation of the tares from the wheat, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. It says, the spirit prophecy bears witness of this by the following statement. The Passover was to be both commemorative and typical, not only pointing back to the deliverance from Egypt, but forward to the greater deliverance which Christ was to accomplish in freeing His people from the bondage of sin. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 277. But we need to connect this reading to the statement in the Great Controversy, page 425 and page 426. Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3 and Malachi 3 verse 5 is distinct and separate work. And it is proven with a shepherd's rod. Because Malachi 3 verse 5 and 6 takes place on the Passover week, whereas Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3 is on the Day of Atonement, according to SR 184. Therefore, that is distinct and separate work. Malachi 3 1 to 3, the direct application must be investigative judgment. But Malachi 3 verse 5, that is executive judgment. The same with Jude 14. Jude 14 is investigative, but Jude 15 is executive. Jude 14 is intended for the righteous. Jude 15 is intended to the wicked. Malachi 3, 1 to 3 is intended to the righteous, the sons of Levi. But Malachi 3 verse 5 is intended to the wicked. Distinct and separate work, brothers and sisters. Malachi 3 verses 1, 2, and 3, that coming of Christ is on the Day of Atonement. Whereas Malachi 3 verse 5, Jude 15, that coming was on the Passover week, by which that is executive judgment. It is called the general destruction of all the wicked, typifying the third coming of Jesus Christ after the millennium, the general destruction of all the wicked. The only difference is that on the third coming after the millennium, that is the general destruction of all the wicked, all wicked human beings, as well as all wicked angels. But in the third invisible coming of Jesus Christ is the general destruction of all the wicked Sabbath keepers, only addressed to all wicked Sabbath keepers throughout the whole world. Therefore, after that, 7 days slaughtering, which is the general destruction of all the wicked Sabbath keepers. After that 7 days, there will be no more wicked Sabbath keepers that would be in existence, because all of them were completely destroyed. So let us continue, brothers and sisters, to our subject. So by this illustration, we can immediately distinguish by the events that the half-hour silence that will take place on the Day of Atonement is not the half-hour silence that will take place on the Passover week. Now let us go back to SR 215 rather. Let us read. To SR 215. Had the silence of half an hour pointed to the coming of Christ, at which time He takes His saints with Him, there would be no necessity for the angel to offer their prayers. Now, let us now study closely. whose prayers that had been offered by the angel. Without any doubt, the angel mentioned here is, brothers and sisters, the Holy Spirit, because He is the only one who can offer the prayers. Although it is not a big deal concerning about it, but the most important part, first, whose prayers to be offered by the angel. Now let us read first 2SR page 220. Let's read 2SR 220. Note the words, at the opening of the judgment for the dead in 1844. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of saints. Revelation 5 verse 8. Mark that no angel offered a prayer, but the prayers of the saints were presented by the beasts and elders through praise by harps and golden vials full of odors. That is, there was no prayer offered for the dead, but their prayers which they had prayed, being recorded while they were yet alive, were presented before the throne. Now let us establish first such concrete evidence. First, there was no prayers offered for the dead. There was no prayers offered for the dead. Second, the prayers of all the saints who are destined for grave and resurrection, it was recorded while they were yet living. And the term used by inspiration is presented. Therefore, the word offered can be applied only to the living saints. To the dead saints, all their recorded prayers were presented before the throne, not by the angel, but by the 4 beasts and the 24 elders through harps, according to this reading, or by harps and golden vials full of odors. Now, I would like to read 2SR 219 and 220. For me, this subject, the half-hour silence, is a wonderful subject. And what we need to do is to carefully study what the shepherd's rod is stated. Now let's read 2SR page 219. Are all the living judged and sealed under the 7th seal? It says, are all the living, or the living saints, judged and sealed under the 7th seal? Or have some been considered before its opening? To answer this question, we quote Revelation 8 verse 3. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. Where is that golden altar? That is in the holy place, right? In the trumpet study. Let us read track number 5, page 78. In coming from the golden altar, the command loosed the 4 angels, shows that the 6th trumpet sounded sometime before the veil to the most holy apartment of the heavenly sanctuary was lifted. Here's another statement in track number 3. It says, I think track number 5, on page, page 31. It says, the altars being in the holy apartment of the sanctuary. So that is the statement. Track number 5, page 31. So the golden altar is found in the holy place. So let us read 2SR 219. It says, are all the living judged and sealed under the 7th seal? Or have some been considered before its opening? To answer this question, we quote Revelation 8 verse 3. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. Note, the prayer is offered for all saints. No one knowing God's truth would dare pray for the dead, for it is abomination in God's sight. Much less would an angel commit such sin. The psalmist declares that prayers for the dead are the invention of the heathen. They join themselves also unto Baal Peor and ate the sacrifices of the dead. Thus they provoke him to anger with their inventions, and the plagues break in upon them. Psalms 106 verse 28 and 29. The dead praise not the Lord, neither any that go down into silence. Psalms 115 verse 17. If the dead praise not God, how can an angel offer a prayer for them before God? Now, brothers and sisters, let us view the event. That statement is very plain. That this angel, at the time when he is offering the prayers of all saints, the saints on earth, they were praising God. Therefore, it cannot be applied to the dead because the dead cannot praise God. Or, at that moment, when that angel is offering prayer for all saints, whose saints that, what is the purpose of his prayer? It can be easily understood that while he is offering the prayer of the saints, the prayer of the living saints, at the same time, he is also praying that God the Father will accept the prayers of all the saints. But at that time, on earth, the saints were praising God. If we will go back to 219, it says, 219, Reformation in view. The Great Reformation in view, vividly represented by the angel at the golden altar, with the prayers of the saints and the casting of the fire from the altar to the earth, is foretold also in the following testimony. In visions of the night, representation passed before me of a great reformatory movement among God's people. Many were praising God. So at that time, the saints were praising God. At the time when the angel is offering a prayer unto them, that God the Father will accept their prayers. Then let us continue into SR 220. But we will continue this subject on the next episode. It says, the praise all saints has reference to all the living who are to be judged. Judged where? In the most holy place. Or, to re-emphasize, it must be the praise all saints has reference to all the living who are to be judged in the most holy place, whose sins are to be blotted out. Evidently, this is done under the seventh seal. If all, then it is definite that all the living saints are counted under the seventh seal. Or in other words, the seventh seal is concerned only the living, according to 2SR 202. So all the saints, all the living saints are counted under the seventh seal. Thus, with the opening of the last seal, commences the judgment for all the living saints. Let nothing confuse you on this point. If we say the prayers of all saints had some connection with the dead, then they should have been offered at the commencement of the judgment, the opening of the first seal. For after the judgment, the prayers cannot profit them. We will continue the subject, brothers and sisters, but I would like to re-emphasize by saying that for after the judgment in the holy place, when their names will be blotted out, their prayers could not profit them anymore. It is useless to pray. It will be out of value, brothers and sisters. God could no longer hear such prayer when our names had been blotted out. Therefore, such prayer, the prayer must be during the proceedings in the judgment for the living in the holy place, before the blotting out of names. Why is it that the saints were praising God? Because their names had been retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. The saints on earth were praising God. Therefore, during the proceedings in the holy place, judgment for the living, we need to pray. And our prayers will be recorded by the angel. And after the blotting out of names, and we are among by which such names had been retained in the Lamb's Book of Life, our prayers that had been recorded by the angel, he will offer it in the most holy place to God the Father, brothers and sisters, to accept all our prayers. So during the proceedings in the holy place, the one who will pray, it is the saints. And our prayers will be recorded. And that recorded prayers, after the blotting out of names, will be presented in the presence of God the Father. And at that time, the saints are no longer the one who is praying, but it is the angel. And the saints on earth, they were praising God because their names had been retained in the Lamb's Book of Life. We will continue this subject on our next episode. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.